The air in the Concordium chamber was never really still. It hummed with the low-level energy fields that kept each delegate in their own pocket of perfect atmosphere. Jinwoo always found the sound calming. It was a steady, predictable thing in a room full of unpredictable beings. He adjusted the thin translation bead in his ear and watched the debate unfold across the crystal ring. Counselor Vrix of its skull was in a fury. His feathers, usually a sleek metallic blue, were puffed out in agitation, catching the light of the neutral star below. A holographic map of the galaxy floated in the center of the chamber, a ugly, pulsing red stain spreading from the outer rim. The swarm. The Cygnus Gap is the final defensive line. Vrix's translated voice was a sharp crackle. If their main force pushes through, they reach the core systems. They consume worlds, people. Your worlds are in that path, human. Do you understand? Jinwoo kept his face calm. He knew every eye was on him. The human representative. The delegate from the species known for good doctors, decent engineers, and terrible soldiers. Physically weak by galactic standards. Slow, fragile, useful, but never formidable. We understand the threat, Counselor, Jinwoo said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. He had learned to speak just loudly enough to be heard over the hum. The United Earth government shares the Concordium's concern. Concern? Vrix snapped. I do not need your concern. I need your warships. I need your Titan-class dreadnoughts. The Kavish have pledged their remaining 3. The Lorvik have sent their entire 7th wing. Where is the human fleet? This was the moment. The script called for Jinwoo to offer the medical support flotilla, the engineering battalions to repair other species ships, the planetary evacuation transports. A useful secondary role. A safe role. A faint, familiar tingle pulsed at the base of his skull. It was not pain, but a signal. A single coded data packet received by the implant buried deep in his temporal bone. The message was simple. 2 words. Criteria met. For 300 years, since humanity first stumbled into the galactic community, they had followed the plan. The silent doctrine. Hide your claws. Smile. Be helpful. Be underestimated. Watch and wait for a threat that could not be stopped by conventional means. The swarm was that threat. Jinwoo looked away from Vrix's blazing eyes and out, into the starfield beyond the transparent chamber wall. Somewhere out there, in the silent dark, Mira was at her post. He could almost picture her, focused and intent, waiting for his signal. The human primary fleet, Jinwoo said, turning back to the council, cannot be committed to the Cygnus Gap. The hum of the chamber seemed to grow louder in the sudden quiet. Several delegates leaned forward. The Lorvik ambassador, a being of shifting moss-like fronds, went perfectly still. Vrix's beak clicked shut, then opened again. Explain. It is otherwise engaged, Jinwoo said simply. The quiet shattered. A chorus of clicks, trills, and translated exclamations filled the air. Vrix let out a sound that was half squawk, half laugh. Otherwise engaged? You have no other engagements. Your borders are quiet. Your only conflict is this one. This is cowardice. Pure, simple parasitism. You let other species bleed while you hide and profit. The insults were harsh. They called humans leeches, shadows, creatures who built nothing of their own, but only patched the works of their betters. Jinwoo absorbed them. He let the anger of a dozen species wash over him, his expression not changing. He thought of Taeyun, down in the Lunar Command Center, probably drinking his 5th cup of coffee, watching numbers that made no sense to anyone else. You misunderstand, Jinwoo said when the noise died down. His calm was a stark contrast to the heated room. It is not a matter of willingness. It is a matter of strategic necessity. What strategic necessity is greater than the survival of the galactic core? Shouted the K-Vish delegate, their forearms gesturing wildly. Jinwu stood up. It was a slow, deliberate movement. In a room of towering skull and bulky K-Vish, he was not an imposing figure. But his stillness commanded a different kind of attention. "Counselor Vrix," he said, ignoring the others. "I request to secure point-to-point quantum channel to the United Earth Security Directorate. Priority level 0. The term meant nothing to most in the room. But Vrix knew. Priority 0 was a Concordium-wide emergency signal, used only for imminent galactic collapse. It bypassed all normal channels. "You waste our time with procedures?" Vrix hissed, but his aggression was now mixed with confusion. He input the command. A small, shimmering field enveloped Jinwu's platform, isolating him from the rest of the chamber's audio sensors. Alone in the bubble of silence, Jinwu spoke to the empty air. "This is Diplomatic Envoy Kim Jinwu. Authorization code Umbra 70 Tango. The Concordium has formally requested full military commitment at the Cygnus Gap. The Swarm Vanguard will breach the line in approximately 6 hours. I am invoking silent protocol. The criteria are met. I repeat, the criteria are met." He waited. Seconds ticked by. He could see the other delegates staring at him through the shimmering field, their faces a mix of anger, impatience, and dawning curiosity. The reply came, not in sound, but as text that scrolled across the inside of his retinal implant. Authorization confirmed. Envoy Kim, you are to proceed with revelation. Command transfers to your discretion. Good luck. The field dropped. All sound rushed back in. "Well?" Vrix demanded. "What is this nonsense? Your leaders have ordered you to comply, yes? To send your ships?" Jinwu took a slow breath. The next words would change everything. For 3 centuries, humanity had played a part. Now the play was over. "No, Counselor," he said. "They have not." He looked around the ring of alien faces, meeting each pair of eyes. The request for a secure channel was not to receive orders. It was to give one. The situation has escalated beyond fleet deployments. The silent protocol is now in effect. He paused, letting the unfamiliar term hang in the air. "You wanted our strength, Counselor. You are about to see it. But I warn you all, you are not prepared for what that means." For the first time, Vrix had no quick retort. He simply stared at the small, calm human, a cold, unfamiliar feeling beginning to prickle at the base of his spine. It was the first touch of fear. Far from the tense silence of the Concordium chamber, Captain Sura of the Skull Warclaw Storm, Harold felt the vibration of the ship's main cannon charging through the soles of her feet. It was a good feeling, a solid feeling. It was the feeling of standing to fight. On the main viewer, the black of the Cygnus Gap was no longer empty. It was a crawling, shimmering nightmare. The swarm did not have ships in the normal sense. They had organic-looking vessels, like hard shells of insect chitin grown to impossible size. They moved in a horrible, silent unison, a cloud of locusts ready to consume the last fields of the galaxy. Her sensor officer, a young male named Kreen, called out readings in a tight voice. Vanguard elements crossing the minefield now. Minimal losses. Their point defenses are efficient. Sura nodded. The mines were a delay, nothing more. She looked at her own formation. 3 Skull Warclaws, including hers. 2 battered Lorvik frigates that looked like they might come apart at the seams. A single blocky K-Vish heavy cruiser. It was not a fleet. It was a gesture. A final defiant gesture. "All ships," she said, her voice echoing across the bridge and the comms. "This is it. We hold the line. We bleed them here so the core worlds can breathe. Target the lead bioships. Fire at will. She did not speak of victory. Everyone on the bridge knew that word had no meaning here. They spoke only of time, of causing enough damage, creating enough debris to slow the swarm for a few more hours. Maybe a day. On the human listening post designated Orion 7, Myra watched the same data stream. Her station was small, all cool metal and blinking lights. The swarm's advance was a flood of red symbols on her screen, swallowing the few blue dots of the Concordium defenders. She felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had friends on one of those Lorvec frigates. A different screen, marked with black borders and complex gravitational equations, flashed with a soft amber light. A text box appeared. Protocol Revelation Stage 1. Authorized. Mira's fingers, which had been still, now flew across her console. She input her long memorized codes, bypassing layers of safety protocols. Orion 7 confirms, she whispered to her empty room. Initiating silent protocol. Unshackling the Umbra. Deep within the moon, in a place that did not exist on any official map, Taeyeon rubbed his tired eyes. The command center was a cathedral to strange science. The main reactor did not glow. It was a sphere of perfect darkness, a hole in reality, contained by shimmering magnetic fields. The readings it gave were not of energy output, but of gravitational influence. It was a machine that bent the unseen rules of the universe. His team, a handful of the best physicists alive, moved quietly. There was no shouting, no drama. They spoke in low tones, checking equations that described the behavior of dark matter, the invisible glue of the cosmos. For 300 years, humanity had not built better plasma cannons. They had learned to touch the fabric of space itself. Tidal stress is nominal. A woman named Ji-eun said from her station, "Quantum. Lattice stability at 98%. Another replied. Taeyeon watched the main holotank. It showed the Cygnus gap, but not as normal sensors saw it. It showed gravity. The swarm fleet was a blotch of mild distortion, their massive ships bending light slightly. The Concordium defenders were smaller pinpricks. And far behind the human lines, hidden in the deep dark, were other shapes. Vast, complex shapes of profound gravitational shadow. They were like drawings made on spacetime with a heavy hand. Lunar Command. This is Envoy Kim. Jingwoo's voice came through, clear and calm over the secure channel. The curtain is up. The audience is waiting. It's time for the show. Taeyeon took a deep breath. He looked at his team. Their faces were pale, serious. They knew the weight of this moment. They were about to reveal a secret kept for generations. A power that would terrify their allies as much as their enemies. Acknowledged, Envoy, Taeyeon said. Initiating Stage 2, bringing the fleet to active status. He entered his final code. God have mercy on us all. On the Storm Herald, Captain Sura saw the first weapons fire. Brilliant lances of plasma from the Kavish cruiser cut across the dark, slamming into the lead swarm vessel. Kaiden boiled away into space. A cheer went up on her bridge. It was a small victory, but it was something. Then the swarm returned fire. Organic projectiles, accelerated to terrifying speeds, slammed into the Lorvec frigate Valiant Breath. The ship's shields flared and died. The hull cracked open like an egg, spilling air and bodies and silence into the void. The cheers on Sora's bridge died instantly. Concentrate fire. Don't let them. Sora's order was cut off. Gravimetric anomaly. Kreen screamed, his voice breaking. Reading massive, impossible distortions. Emerging from nowhere, right behind the swarm. Sura spun to her own sensor display. The screen was going crazy. Space itself, the empty canvas of the Cygnus Gap, was writhing. The light from distant stars behind the swarm armada began to twist and stretch, forming strange, shimmering arcs. It was as if a giant, invisible lens was moving through the battlefield. "What is that?" She breathed. "Is it a swarm weapon?" "No, Captain. The swarm. Their formation is breaking. They are reacting to it. They are turning." Before the swarm could fully react, the empty space solidified. It did not light up with engines. No shields glowed. Instead, the starfield simply vanished, replaced by patches of absolute, perfect blackness. The blackness had shape. It was angular. It was vast. It was the silhouette of a fleet more massive than anything Sura had ever imagined, visible only because it blotted out the stars behind it. It was a fleet of shadows, cold and silent, sliding into reality without a sound. On Orion 7, Mira watched the same event on her gravity map. The dormant shadows had woken up. They were now active, furious knots in space-time. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not for the Lorvik. It was for the galaxy. The quiet was over. The long, careful secret was dead. The Umbra fleet was here. The perfect silence in the Concordium chamber was more shocking than any noise. Counselor Vrix's beak was parted slightly. He was not breathing. Every delegate, every aide, every guard was motionless. They were all staring at the large holographic feed from the Cygnus Gap, where the last images of the brave, doomed Concordium fleet were now joined by a new, impossible sight. The dark shapes hung in the void. They were not just black. They were a deeper black than space, a solid nothingness that hurt the eyes. They had no running lights, no engine glow, no heat signatures. They were ghosts, and they were moving. Jinwoo's platform was no longer isolated. The shimmering field was gone. He stood in the center of that frozen silence, the only person in the room who seemed able to move. He slowly walked to the edge of his platform, looking at the hologram, and back at the assembled galaxy. "Counselors," he said. His voice was not loud, but in the quiet, it was like a hammer fall. "You asked for our fleet. This is the primary combat force of the United Earth Government. We call it the Umbra Fleet." Vrix finally managed to draw a ragged breath. What trick of light is this? Some projection? A hologram to frighten the swarm? "No trick," Jinwoo said. He gestured, and a smaller data window opened beside the main feed. It showed gravitational readings. The lines were spiking into realms of theory. You are witnessing vessels constructed from, and powered by, manipulated dark matter. They exist mostly in a dimensional phase, slightly offset from our own. They do not reflect light. They do not emit radiation you can detect. You can only see their effect on the space around them. On the bridge of the Storm Herald, Captain Sura was not thinking about science. She was a soldier. She saw only the effect. One of the smaller dark shapes, a thing like a sharp black thorn, drifted closer to her position. It passed between her ship and a distant nebula. The nebula's light did not shine on it. The ship was a whole. It sliced the beautiful cloud of gas in half on her view screen, leaving a black scar across the cosmos. A primal chill, deeper than the cold of space, locked her joints. All ships. She barked, finding her voice. "Hold fire. Do not engage the new contacts. Stay out of their path." She did not know if they were allies. She did not know if they were gods or monsters. She only knew they were power, raw and undeniable. The swarm had no such caution. The hive mind, confronted with the unknown, did what it always did. It attacked. 100 bioships turned from the tiny Concordium fleet and unleashed everything they had at the nearest dark vessel. It was a ship larger than a Skull command station, shaped like a flattened diamond. Streams of corrosive plasma, powerful enough to melt battle plate, shot across the distance. They struck the dark hall and did nothing. The plasma did not splash, did not burn. It seemed to pass into the blackness and simply vanish. A volley of hypervelocity spines, designed to pierce the strongest armor, followed. Their targeting systems lost lock meters away, and they spun harmlessly into the void, missing completely. The dark ship did not return fire. It did not change course. It simply continued its slow, ominous drift. Then, another ship, this one long and sleek like a needle, acted. It did not fire a cannon. A point of space in front of it shimmered, like air over a hot desert. The shimmer shot forward, invisible but for its effect. Where it passed through the heart of the swarm formation, space itself twisted. Sura watched, her heart pounding in her ears. A dozen swarm bioships were caught in the field. They did not explode. Their structures, engineered to withstand tremendous force, were meaningless. The ships were pulled. It was as if an invisible giant had grabbed them and twisted. They spiraled inwards, crashing into each other, their chitinous hulls cracking and splintering under gravitational forces they were never meant to endure. In seconds, a ball of chaotic debris floated where a squadron had been. The dark needle ship moved on, silent as a thought dot in the command center inside the moon. Taeyan watched the power graphs. They're drawing too much from the main lattice for sustained singularity projection, he said, his voice tight. Tell them to switch to shear fields. It's more efficient for group targets. Ji-yoon relayed the command, her fingers flying. The orders did not go by radio. They were transmitted through quantum-entangled particles linked to the gravity drives of the Umbra ships. A whisper in the fabric of reality itself. Back in the chamber, the silence had broken into a storm of whispers, of shocked clicks and trills. Vrix was staring at Jinwoo, his earlier fury replaced by a kind of horrified awe. You have had this? All this time? While we fought and died at the frontier? While we protected you? Jinwoo met his gaze. There was no apology in his eyes. Only a deep, weary resolve. Yes, counselor. For 12 human generations, we have worked on this. While you mastered fusion and plasma, we studied the dark between the stars. We did not hide it out of malice. We hid it out of necessity and out of fear. Fear of us? Vrix spat. Fear of this, Jinwoo said, pointing to the hologram. Another dark ship, a bulky behemoth, had unleashed a different weapon. A patch of space in front of a large swarm carrier simply collapsed. It wasn't an explosion. It was a sudden, localized point of infinite density. A temporary micro-black hole. The swarm ship, and 3 others near it, were stretched into long, thin strings of matter and then swallowed utterly. Then the hole winked out. It left nothing behind, not even debris. You see a weapon, Jinwoo continued, his voice heavy. But we see a door we cannot close. A genie we cannot put back in the bottle. How do you reveal a power that has no counter? A fleet that cannot be seen, cannot be tracked on sensors, and uses gravity itself as a weapon? Would you have welcomed us? Or would you have united in panic to destroy the monsters before they could become a threat? He looked around the room, at faces filled with terror, not of the swarm, but of humanity. The swarm consumes biomass. It is a known, terrible thing. But this rewrites the rules of war, of physics. The Cygnus Gap is not a last stand. It is a demonstration, a containment field built from the bones of the universe. On the view screen, the Umbra fleet was advancing. It was not a battle. It was an erasure. The swarm, a terror of the galaxy for centuries, was being dismantled with a calm, silent precision that was more frightening than any rage. The galaxy watched, and for the first time, they understood true, helpless awe. They had thought humanity weak. Now they saw that humanity had simply been playing a different game, on a board no one else could even see. And they had just won. On the bridge of the Storm Herald, the silence was so deep it felt like a physical pressure. Captain Sura had given no orders for a long time. There was no point. Her ship, her entire fleet, had been rendered spectators. The small, desperate battle they had prepared to fight was over. A new, incomprehensible war had taken its place. She watched a dark matter cruiser, a thing like a flattened black spearhead, slide past her port side. It was close enough that she could see no detail on its surface. No seams, no ports, no scorch marks. Just an absence. It moved with a smoothness that defied momentum, as if space itself was carrying it. Her crew did not breathe until it was past. The swarm was not surrendering. It had no concept of surrender. It was a hive, a single mind, and it reacted to the new threat with blind, adaptive fury. Seeing that energy weapons were useless, the larger swarm bioships began to charge. They turned their massive, chitinous bodies and accelerated, aiming to ram the dark vessels. "They're going to physical impact," Sura's tactical officer whispered, as if speaking too loudly might attract the attention of the dark ships at the lead swarm ship. A colossal beetle-like carrier slammed into the side of the human cruiser at a significant fraction of light speed. There was no spectacular collision. There was a flash of distorted light, a brief, sickening warp of space around the point of impact, and then the swarm ship was simply gone, not shattered, not drifting. It had vanished. The dark cruiser continued its path, unmarked, unshaken, as if a gnat had flown into a mountain. "What happened?" Sora asked, her voice hoarse. Her sensor officer, Kreen, was staring at his readings, his feathers lying flat against his skull in confusion. I don't know. The mass of the swarm ship. The gravitational spike was off the scale at the moment of contact. It's like it was swallowed by a gravity well that only existed for a microsecond. The human ship must have a localized density field around its hull, a wall of twisted space. Sura tried to understand. A ship that was protected not by a shield, but by a permanent, controlled distortion of reality. It was armor made from the fabric of the Cosmos Dot. The human fleet was not invincible. In the Moon Command Center, Taeyan saw the strain. A warning chime echoed softly. Lattice stress at 87% on the event horizon. Ji Yoon reported, her face pale in the blue light of her console. The sustained localized gravity field for defense is a massive drain. They can't keep it up indefinitely across the whole fleet, while also conducting offensive maneuvers. Taeyan chewed his lip. The Umbra fleet was powerful, but it was a power with a short battery life. The reactors feeding them through the quantum link were humanity's greatest achievement and their greatest limit. Tell Myra to have them cycle defenses. Offensive priority on the swarm command nodes. Break the hive mind, and the rest will flounder. On the listening post Orion 7, Mira received the data and sent the pulse. Her role was that of a translator, turning human tactical needs into the complex gravitational commands the Umbra ships could execute. On the view screen, the strategy shifted. The dark ships stopped trying to obliterate every single swarm vessel. Instead, they began to move with a new terrifying purpose. They glided through the swarm formation like black knives through water, ignoring the smaller ships. They were hunting for the larger, more complex bioships, the ones that pulsed with unique energy signatures, the neural hubs of the hive. One of these hubs, a bulbous, pulsating vessel covered in glowing tendrils, found itself the target of 3 dark ships. They surrounded it, not firing, but pulling. From 3 points, invisible gravitational tethers latched onto the hub ship. On the Storm Herald sensors, space around the swarm hub warped into a tri-lobed, impossible shape. Then, with a silent, graceful motion, the three dark ships moved in different directions that the swarm hub did not tear. It stretched. The organic material, tougher than any metal, elongated like hot tar. It thinned, and then, with a final silent snap, it separated into three ragged pieces. The glowing lights on its surface died instantly. A wave of visible confusion rippled through the nearby swarm vessels. Their movements became jerky, uncoordinated. "They're cutting off the head," Sura realized aloud. It was a clean, surgical, and horrifying tactic dot in the Concordium chamber. Jinwoo watched the same images. He could feel the fear in the room hardening into something else, a deep, cold dread. They were not watching a salvation. They were watching a display of absolute dominance. The swarm was being systematically dismantled by a force that operated on rules they didn't understand. A delegate from an aquatic species, her voice filtered through a bubbler, finally spoke. "Envoy Kim, when this is over, what happens to this fleet?" Jinwoo had expected this question. He had practiced the answer 1,000 times, but now the words felt heavy and inadequate. The Umbra fleet will return to its standby status. The energy required to keep it fully manifested is prohibitive. And if we, the Concordium, request that it be dismantled, the delegate pressed, a tremble in her voice. Jinwoo turned to her. He did not smile. "With all respect, that is not a request humanity can honor. The technology exists. The knowledge exists. To dismantle, it would be to make ourselves defenseless, not just from the swarm, but from anyone who might fear us too much." He let the implication hang. They had just seen what happened to those humanity perceived as a threat. He looked back at the main feed. The battle, if it could be called that, was winding down. The swarm formation was in tatters, large chunks of it simply gone, the rest drifting in confused, leaderless clusters. The dark ships were beginning to slow their movements, drawing back. On the moon, Taeyun watched the power graphs finally begin to fall. The crisis point was passing. Initiate stand-down sequence. Gradual dispersal. Let them fade slowly. We don't want to look like we're running out of power. One by one, the vast black shapes began to lose their solidity. They didn't turn and fly away. They simply became less there. The star field behind them started to twinkle through their hulls, as if they were becoming smoke. Within minutes, the Cygnus Gap was empty again, save for the drifting debris of the swarm and the small, battered, utterly silent ships of the CONCORDIUM. But the frozen silence had returned, both on the bridge of the Storm Herald and in the Concordium chamber. But it was a different silence now. Before, it had been the silence of shock at a revealed secret. Now, it was the silence that comes after a storm has passed, when you look out at the changed landscape and realize nothing will ever be the same again. The swarm was broken, and the galaxy had just met its new, quiet, and utterly terrifying guardian. The Cygnus Gap was quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the heavy, stunned quiet that follows a cataclysm. The last shimmer of the dark matter ships faded, leaving only the scarred evidence of their passing. Strange, spiraling patterns of swarm debris, twisted by forces no one could see. Captain Sura's Storm Herald floated amidst this new alien graveyard. Her crew worked silently, checking for survivors they knew they would not find, their movements slow with shock. On her main view screen, a request for a direct channel from the Concordium chamber flashed. She accepted it. The stern, feathered face of Counselor Vrix appeared. He looked older. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary calculation. "Captain." "Report," he said, his voice stripped of its usual pride. The swarm force is neutralized, Counselor. No remaining hostile contacts. Our ships are intact. She paused. The human fleet has withdrawn. They just faded away. Vrix was silent for a moment, digesting the word. Faded. It was the perfect word. They had not left. They had simply stopped being visible. Where were they now? Lurking in the dark between stars, just out of sight? The thought was a cold knot in his stomach. Return to Concordium space, Captain. We will. We will need to speak of what happened here. Back in the chamber, the holographic feed now showed the empty gap. The delegates had not moved. The air still hummed, but the sound now felt like a taunt, a reminder of normalcy that was forever out of reach. Jinwoo remained standing. He was the anchor in the room, the only one who seemed to know what came next, because he had planned for it his entire life. He waited for them to find their voices. It was Vrix, appearing on the chamber's main screen from his own ship, who broke the silence again. Envoy Kim, the swarm is destroyed. The galaxy owes your species a debt. The words were clearly bitter in his mouth, but they were correct. They were the formal words. We did what was necessary, Jinwoo replied, his tone neutral. Why? The question burst from the Lorvek ambassador, its fronds trembling. Why the secrecy? The deception? For centuries, we shared technology, culture, trust. And it was all a lie. You were a sleeping giant in our midst, pretending to be a child. Jinwoo nodded, accepting the anger. It was a lie. We admit that. But consider the alternative. If, 100 years after first contact, we had shown you the first dark matter reactor, what would you have done? He looked around. No one answered. You would have been fascinated. Then frightened. Then you would have demanded we share the technology. And when we explained its principles were unlike anything you knew, when we could not give you a simple blueprint, you would not have believed us. You would have thought we were hoarding power. Suspicion would have grown. Fear would have festered. Eventually, you would have tried to take it, or to destroy us, before we could use it against you. The Concordium would have shattered, and war would have come. A war fought with weapons no one could defend against. He let the grim picture settle. So we chose a different path. We let you believe we were weak. We became the helpers, the healers, the builders. We integrated completely. We earned a place at this table not through threat, but through service. All the while, we worked. We waited. Not for power, but for a moment when revealing our strength would not spark a war, but prevent an extinction. The swarm provided that moment. Vrix's image on the screen seemed to sag. And now, the moment has passed. The swarm is gone. What is to stop us from uniting now against what you have revealed? You are a greater unknown than the swarm ever was. Jinwoo finally showed a flicker of emotion, a sad, understanding smile. Nothing, Counselor. Nothing at all stops you from trying. That is the point. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping the room. You are military, Counselor Vrix. Think tactically. You saw the fleet. Can you target it? Can you track it? Can your shields block a gravitational shear? Can your sensors see a ship that does not interact with light? You are not looking at a bigger gun. You are looking at a different set of physical laws. Uniting against us would be like fish uniting against the concept of water. You cannot fight what you cannot grasp, and you cannot grasp what you cannot even see. The truth of his words was a cold bath. They had all seen it. The swarm had tried everything. Nothing had worked. So what are you? Asked the aquatic delegate, her voice small. Our new masters? No, Jinwoo said firmly. We are the question you now have to answer. For 3 centuries, the question was, what is humanity? You had an answer. They are useful, harmless friends. That answer is wrong. The new question is this: how does the galaxy live alongside a species that holds a power with no counter? We do not wish to rule. We do not want your worlds or your tribute. We want only to survive, and for our neighbors to survive as well. He paused, letting the silence work for him. The silent protocol is complete. The secret is out. The old game is over. We propose a new one. Not a game of master and servant, but of coexistence with an irreversible truth. We will remain in the Concordium. We will continue to share our medical and engineering knowledge. The Umbra fleet will not patrol your borders. It will guard the dark places, the gaps between, from threats like the swarm. It will be a shield, not a sword held to your throat. But you must know it is there. You must live with the knowledge. He finished, and the chamber was once again frozen, but not in shock. It was in the paralysis of a terrible, irreversible understanding. There was no going back. The human myth was shattered. They were not the galaxy's children. They were its mysterious, powerful, and deeply dangerous guardians. A partnership with them was no longer between junior and senior members. It was a partnership with a force of nature. Vrix finally spoke, his voice gravelly with defeat and acceptance. The Concordium will need to confer. We will need time. Take all the time you require, Counselor, Jinwu said, his posture relaxing slightly. The hardest part was over. Humanity has been patient for 300 years. We can be patient a little longer. He gave a small, formal bow, not as a subordinate, but as an equal, as something new. The transmission ended, and he was left alone in the gaze of the galaxy's representatives. They looked at him now not with pity or irritation, but with a wary, fearful respect. They were indeed frozen in a new kind of silence, the silence of a universe that had just grown much larger, much stranger, and much more aware of the quiet, watchful people from the pale blue world. The play was over. The real work, the forever work of balancing this new, terrifying truth, had just begun.